is the March 23rd, I believe, 23rd advisory meeting via Zoom. Jonathan Hurwitz.
Yep, here.
Nope, maybe no one can hear me. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Susan.
Okay, sorry, I was talking and no one was saying anything, so I assume you couldn't hear me. I'm going to go ahead and do a roll call and call the meeting to order. It's March 23rd advisory meeting via Zoom due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So if I could have everybody unmute and answer, I have Jonathan Hurwitz.
Here.
David Lutz.
Dave, you muted.
Here.
Brian Beachkovsky.
Here.
Kiara Moore.
Here.
Jamil Siddiqui.
Here.
Rob Garrity.
Here.
Jackie Katz is not available this evening, and neither is Michael Huff. I think that's everybody. I don't have my list in front of me, and I'm not looking at my screen, so I apologize if I did overlook someone. Apologies. I am also here, Susan Klein. And if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to do advisory stuff at the end and go ahead and turn it over since I'm driving. I will be stopping in a few minutes and be able to get on my computer. I just need about 5 more minutes to do that. So if who's going for Erica, who's going first? Do you know?
I believe the recodification is first, and then Norfolk Public.
Okay, so if we could go ahead, who's doing the recodification? Is that Blythe, Carol?
Sure, I'll kick it off, Susan. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I apologize again for being in my car. I'm so sorry. I had some issues trying to get everything done at the same time today.
Not at all.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. So joining us tonight is Town Council Tom Harrington. Tom has stepped in when he joined working with us in August to helping us complete this project, which was started about 2 years ago. And so, as you know, on the warrant, there are 4 articles dedicated to the recodification of both the general and the zoning bylaws, and there's 2 articles for each. And Tom has prepared a short presentation to take you through at a high level what those changes are. And then we can go in detail, if you'd like to, through the various articles which have these all the changes that are proposed for both sets of bylaws. So with that, I will turn it over to Tom, and I think he'll need assistance to share his screen from Erica. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Blythe. Yeah, if I could have share screen permission.
While we're waiting for that, I'd also say that joining us tonight is Carol Green, Town Clerk. Carol and I have been focused on the general bylaws, and then Rich McCarthy's also on the call. He's been intimately involved in the zoning bylaw changes.
Thank you. So without further ado, good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tom Harrington. I'm an attorney at Miaris and Harrington, and was last September appointed town council in Norfolk, and very pleased to be here. With me is Chris Heap, my partner and the attorney in the office that does all the zoning work. So I'm going to take you through kind of a short slide presentation. If you have questions, please stop me. We can kind of jump in anywhere you want, but I'll kind of set the table, and then we'll get into some changes. So in 2019, the town contracted with a company called General Code to convert the town's bylaws and regulations into the E-code format. Now, the E-code format we selected consists of divisions, then chapters or articles, and then sections. Currently, there are 122 cities and towns in Massachusetts that use the E-code format. So while the wording of our bylaws will be unique to Norfolk, if town meeting approves of this conversion, the look of our bylaws will be similar to the other 122 cities and towns that use E-code. Furthermore, we hope that the E-code format makes our bylaws as accurate and as enforceable as possible. So when I joined, we were kind of quickly assigned teams. And so you can see that we have our general bylaws review team, which consists of town administrator, town clerk, town council, and others. And so that's to say, I'm sure lots of people, participated in this review, but kind of the teams that we worked with were town administrator and town clerk. Our zoning bylaw review was the town planner, the building commissioner, the town administrator, town council, and others. And so to start off, I want to make clear that our guiding principle throughout this process has been that substantive changes should be made separately at future town meetings. So it was not our intention to make any substantive changes. Now, that called for a lot of judgment calls along the way, and I will share some of those calls with you in future slides. But suffice it to say, when there's a wording change, there's a wording change. But whenever we agreed to a wording change, it was always with the idea that it would not result in a real change or a substantive change. And we always tried to err on the side of caution. Okay, so once you sign up with general code and begin the E-code process, there's a series of steps which are spelled out on the slide that kind of leads you to from where you are to the final code delivery, new set of bylaws for the town. So to begin with the organizational analysis, the town sent its bylaws, its regulations, and its recent town meeting votes to E-code, who compiles and organizes them into the E-code format. So they're taking, our town clerk section, which is here, and plugging it into one of their more or less standard town clerk sections. E-code then identifies and deletes any bylaws that have been repealed or superseded and inserts any amendments. So the next step is the legislative evaluation. And this is kind of the bulk of the work for E-code. But in this step, E-code has a team of attorney editors and legal editors who thoroughly review and analyze our bylaws for conflicts, for duplications, for inconsistencies, and to ensure compliance with statutory requirements. From that evaluation, E-code develops and sends the town pages and pages of questions, and those questions identify for the town all the conflicts and inconsistencies. Then below the questions are a series of choices. They either we solve it on our own or they kind of give us a go left or go right choice. So once we received that back from E-code, it became time for the town to do, kind of the bulk of its work. So the town teams that I identified in the previous slide went through all the conflicts and inconsistencies identified, and we worked through them one by one. We kind of we started in the September-October timeframe, and we finished our work in the beginning of December. So once we sent that back to them, E-code then moved on to the creation of a digital draft. So they took all our responses, incorporated them into a preliminary draft that they delivered to us on February 14. So we now assembled both teams again. and took about 10 days to review that first draft for accuracy. And by the way, that first draft is about 516 pages. So it was a good effort. We submitted our additional edits and corrections to E-Code, who then incorporated our edits and corrections and produced the next or final draft for us on March 14th. So it's that draft that's now been posted to the website, and it's that draft that we intend to bring to town meeting for approval. Now, to be fair, I would not be surprised if a few more edits are discovered before town meeting. So what we posted on the website may not be the ultimate final draft. And in fact, I think that both town teams hope that all the boards and commissions in town and any and all interested citizens take the opportunity to review the draft, particularly those sections that may apply to them or that they may use on a regular basis, to make sure that there are no unintended edits. Okay, so now in red, you'll see code adoption. That's where we are now. This is kind of our first meeting to present our newly revamped code. It's our hope that this meeting and future meetings go well and that we're able to present this to the annual town meeting in May. If town meeting goes well, then we hit the final step, which is the code delivery step. Now in code delivery, E-Code will prepare a final draft that will be available through both the E-Code portal and in hard copy. And I think kind of the biggest selling point here is the E-Code portal. If you take the time and you just Google E-Code 360, it'll take you to the portal and you can select Massachusetts, and then you'll see all 122 towns that have their bylaws there. So you click on a city or town and you'll find that the search function is quite good. In fact, if you want to see town clerk provisions, you can see them for all the towns, or a certain county. You can break your search down, and I think that's one of the biggest strengths of the E-Code process. So now I'm going to move on, and we're going to talk about exactly what we are presenting to town meeting. So remembering that this is quite a long, it's 516-page draft. What I'm trying to do here is separate into types the changes we've made and give you some examples of those. So in the first part, and in the first Article 17, we assign chapter and article numbers to each of the general bylaws. We then renumber each of those sections accordingly, and we insert chapter, article, section, and subsection titles. And finally, we update all the internal references so that, when a certain article refers to the select board, that reference is now correct. So that's the easy one. That's just putting them in, kind of new file folders and not really changing anything. Okay, some examples of that. So what's currently Article 4, Legal Affairs, now becomes Chapter 43. Article 5, Records and Reports, now becomes Chapter 71. You can see the other two examples, but that I hope gives you a sense of, kind of these kind of simple renumbering changes. There was also a number of incorrect references to board names and employee titles. And for example, wherever we refer to the town treasurer and or the town tax collector, we change that reference to the correct title, treasurer collector. We don't have a board of cemetery commissioners. That's the Department of Public Works. So that change was made. We don't have a board of water commissioners. The select board serves as our board of water commissioners. So that those changes have been made. And advisory board is not accurate. So those references have been changed to advisory committee. Kind of some more examples. You see, we along the way, when you kind of borrow bylaws from other towns, sometimes you borrow the nomenclature that they use for some of their employees. And so we now changed Director of Planning to Director of Planning and Land Use. Our Superintendent of Highways is a Director of Public Works. Board of Appeals is actually the Zoning Board of Appeals. On the state level, the Department of Food and Agriculture is now the Department of Agricultural Resources. And the shorthand Norfolk Recreation, we changed to Norfolk Recreation Commission. Some inaccurate terms, again, so I hope you're really catching the theme of nothing substantive. So we took out references to ordinance because this is not an ordinance. Cities have ordinances, towns have bylaws, so we changed it to bylaw. Sometimes it refers to the bylaw as a regulation, so we changed that. There's actually penalty fees is not the correct term. A town would call it a fine, so that's what we did. We don't have a personnel bylaw, we have personnel policies. Kind of classic typo, specific in the permit was meant to be specified in the permit, so we made that change. And we don't have special use permits, we just have special permits. So we made that change. So now, now we're getting closer to that line I was talking about. But so here's a few that we changed, and I'll explain why we did it. Non-criminal disposition of violations. For earth removal, we changed the amount from 300 to 200. The reason being that state statute caps the amount we can fine for earth removal violations to 200. So we had actually exceeded the statutory amount. So we corrected it. So we are now in line with the statute. Canvassing and soliciting. I think this was the one point where we all looked at it and saw that we had a $2 fine and thought, the paper that we're issuing the fine on is probably worth more than the $2. So we changed it to 10. We can certainly make a more substantive change in the future and increase it. But we felt a $2 fine does no one any good. And so we kind of went to what we felt was the lowest simple fine we could make. And then another example at chapter, I went back, sorry about that. At fires and fire prevention, we had a fine that read not less than 10 or more than 50. And by state law, we're not allowed to have ranges of fines for 21D fines. So we can't say between 10 and 50. That's actually not enforceable. A court would throw that out. So we changed it to the higher amount, 50. But again, I hope a good example of what we consider a small change, but worth mentioning because it wasn't kind of exactly as it was. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm having a little Zoom problem here. Okay. Statute and regulation changes. So either we had misquoted the statute or regulation, or the statute and regulation has changed since we originally quoted it. So in Council on Aging, we cleaned up the reference from 19.1 to 19A. In our CPC bylaw, we removed sections 1 and 2 as it's just section 2. We had referenced the wrong law under marijuana establishments. So we now inserted the correct statute and the correct regulations. And it's the same in the final one. We had actually missed a B, if you can, I don't know if my pointer's working, but we had missed a B in our reference to the federal code. So we added that. Again, maybe an example of a more substantive change, but we did this to clarify the wording, and this is the legal affairs change. And so I'll just take a second and you can see we added what's in blue. and deleted the strike through because we think it's clearer, because we think it's a more accurate reading and more understandable. And so essentially kind of took that bottom line and put it up on the top. So doesn't change the meaning, we think, just reads better. Few examples of deletions. In the possession of open containers, there was a sentence at the end: a violation of this bylaw shall be determined a breach of the peace. Not really wording we use anymore. So we took it out. And in the building numbering, it originally read that the numbers on buildings were to be made of metal or metal leaf. And we thought that was maybe kind of a bit of an antiquated provision. So we took that out. And I'm going to stop the share there and just see if you have any changes or have any questions. There we go. Sorry about that. So that's the presentation. Now I can do a kind of a much deeper dive and take you through the bylaw kind of change for change. But that's kind of the level of changes. And so I thought I'd stop now and see if you have any questions and kind of see where you want to go from here.
Does anyone have any questions?
Susan, I do.
Go ahead, David.
You've got a couple of government nerds on your committee here.
Glad to have
I'm
you.
going to ask a couple questions that may seem a little esoteric. The first one is, have you done this in other towns where you've seen complaints about removing? Our new bylaws will no longer be, well, I guess what I'd call annotated, where you can see where the changes occurred, the years that they occurred, and things like that.
Correct.
Have there been complaints about that?
So I guess so. Yeah. So answer to the first question. Yes, I went through this process in Templeton about 2 years ago. Answer to the second question, and so that's this specific E-code process. We've done bylaw rewrites for more than a couple cities and towns along the way. Town council is kind of, it's our entire business, so the process itself is not new. So in answer to your second question, it's my understanding that we still may be entitled to annotations. I see annotations in other versions of E-code. And so the fact that you don't see them here does not mean that they won't appear in the kind of the final portal version of E-code.
Okay. Yeah, having not looked at the E-code 360 site, it'll be interesting to look at that. I should probably say, most importantly, I think this is a really good, positive project overall, because I know that any law gets uglier over time based on changes to it, or any set of bylaws get uglier over time based on changes to them. I'm going to challenge you a little bit. In the fire fines that you referenced,
Yes.
you referenced Chapter 21D, which I'm assuming is a state law.
Yes.
What is that state law?
So Chapter 21D is called non-criminal dispositions. So before the state created 21D, in order to enforce a fine, we would have had to take someone to court. So it was a court process. 21D allowed us to, and they created a process where if we follow 21D, which means that we have to have a bylaw that identifies the fine and identifies with specificity the amount of the fine, and identifies with specificity who enforces the fine. If we follow that process, when we issue a fine, instead of having to take someone to court, we can actually go through a court clerk process And you don't have to have an attorney, anyone. And so the, for lack of a better example, the dog officer or the animal officer, if the animal officer issues a fine, the animal officer could actually go to the district court and have the court clerk help enforce the fine.
And my last question is kind of an incredibly nerdy question, but the reference that you changed in the marijuana law from the chapter of the acts that it was passed in,
Right.
That's not necessarily inaccurate. It's just not as accurate as referencing the actual.
Fair point. Yeah, fair point.
I wanted to make sure that we weren't.
Right. Yeah. So it's
actual violation. It's
right,
just it's a cleanup thing, right?
Right. That chapter of 2012 has now been
Codified.
codified as chapter 94I.
Yeah, and the regulation doesn't exist anymore. It got moved to the marijuana commission.
Okay. And I'm being told that the regulation that was cited in the original one doesn't exist anymore because it got moved from DPH to the Cannabis Control Commission.
Thank you. Sorry to be a nerd, but
No, I honestly, and I'm not kidding, nerds unite are welcome because, we've all done our best to take a look at this and make sure it's right. And we believe it is, but there's sections of the bylaw that people live with that I've read 2 or 3 times. And if you live with it, you can look at it and go, that's, this feels like the meaning has changed, where to me, if I haven't dealt with it like that, might not say the same thing. So it's almost a call to arms. The more people that can look at it, the better, I think.
actually, I did have one more. I'm sorry I missed it. It's actually, I think it's a real change, the canvassing fine, because if our fine reads $2, it's $2. I mean, we have to that's a substantive change. It may be ridiculous from that perspective.
Yep.
But it's when it was put in place 40, 50, 75 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a substantive change, and maybe it's something we put aside and say canvassing fine should be $50 rather than 10
and wait and do it at another meeting. So it's again, that's a fair point. I will tell you that probably garnered as much discussion as any point.
Right.
I think as Blythe and Carol and I were sitting around looking at that one, we just thought, we could leave it the same, but $2 just feels
I agree.
wasteful on some level. But I take your point, and I'll bring it back to the committee, and maybe we'll have a rethink about that one.
It's 2 cases of beer, nickel deposit returns. And so anyways.
So if I can follow, I'm kind of the junior member of the government nerd caucus on the committee. And I'll echo Dave's, the 2 to 10, as you know from being on our town meeting, we do have some folks who are somewhat persnickety, and I could see us devolving into a fight about this is a substantive policy change and not just a Scrivener's change. And I would throw the metal leaf issue in there, the metal or metal leaf signs numbers, because the intent, I am assuming, was that you want something that's not going to fade, right? So we'll have people saying, I can just stick on a plastic sticker on and that'll suit for my numbering, and then the firefighters can't find them. So the farther we get away from true Scrivener's errors kinds of things, I think the better we are.
Okay, I'm looking at my fellow general bylaw committee members, and we will put our heads together on this one tomorrow.
I don't think we'll be the ones to bring that up. I can give you a couple of names of people who may bring things like that up.
We want to make this, we want to, I think we all want success. So, do appreciate the feedback.
Okay, does
Are we
anyone
ready to
else?
move on to some zoning aspects, folks?
Yeah, so would you like me to do the zoning presentation as well? Okay.
Please.
Just before, does anyone else have anything to add before he moves on? Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Old one. Where? Have I exposed myself as a clunky PowerPointer? Okay, so very similar presentation to the last one, and I didn't put in the slides about the team and the process. So on this one, I'm going to get right to the changes. And I will say, you know, kind of, so zoning is even a little trickier than general bylaw is. So I won't be surprised if the government nerd committee has more comments for us. But so in this instance, we are now going to move our zoning bylaw, and it becomes chapter 310 of the of our new bylaw in E-code. Again, did the same thing, renumber each section and subsection of the bylaw accordingly. We insert articles, section and subsection titles, and again, updating all the internal references. Similar to the last board, kind of making the same name updates, or I should say title updates. Same again, zoning board of appeals, using chair for chairman or chairperson, citing the correct name of the outdoor advertising board, right name of the DPW superintendent, which is the director of public works. We don't have a design review committee, we have a design review board, and the correct name is Department of Agricultural Resources. Again, kind of simple amended terms. You know, it's not an ordinance, it's a bylaw. We have a floodplain protection district, not a floodplain district. We have a water supply protection district and not what's shown on the screen. Base floor use would have been a typo. It should have been base floor area. And in the marijuana bylaw, recreational establishments is not the correct term. It's properly called marijuana establishments. In this instance, we standardized all the references to Mass General Law to the form you see on the screen. Same change here that we already discussed. And in the fire prevention regulations cited, you know, I'm not sure if that was the right site or if that was always wrong, but this is currently the right site. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's an example of word clarification or clarifying the wording. So put a comma after in all districts. Change the or to the and because we thought that was more accurate, and put in shall be established. I'll take a second and let you read that. Deletions, we amended the last section of a definition of parking space shall be a minimum of 9 feet by 19 feet. I'm actually going to hit pause. Why did we make that change? I'm going to come back to that one because I actually don't know the answer to why we made that change, and someone's going to ask, so we will get you that answer. But moving on, so just changing and taking out references to ordinance and went with bylaws.
It was duplicated.
Was that it, Rich? It was in there twice?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So the same sentence read twice. So it's just deleting one and leaving one. We deleted the definition of impervious waste because it's is repealed. The second definition of outdoor storage is repealed. We had two. And we repealed the definition of zoning enforcement authority. Again, Rich, why was that one?
I think it wasn't used anywhere.
Oh, that's right. Zoning enforcement authority was actually defined but never used in the bylaw. And that's so again, that's the end. So we're right now, do you have the definition of impervious waste? Why we did that? We're getting, because I assume that one's going to be a question too. So we're going to get you an answer to that. And other than that, I'm going to stop the share. And see if anyone has any further questions on that. I assume you have a question on that one.
It was supposed to be impervious surface, not waste.
Impervious surface. Of impervious surface.
Okay. So the answer there is there were two, one for impervious surface and one for impervious waste, and they meant the same thing.
It's in the definition, it says there were two for impervious surface. So we may have based maybe incorrect.
Okay.
But there were two. It was a duplicative definition. We're taking one of them out.
Okay. So it was a double, it's defined twice, so we took one out. So I'm going to stop there, and I see David Lutz has a question.
Go ahead, David.
You're on mute.
I think Rob had his hand up first, but
Sorry about that, Rob.
Oh, go ahead, Dave.
in your previous reference, sorry to be a nerd, I think you meant chapter 40, section 21D relative to the fines.
I did. Is that not what I said?
It said chapter 21D.
Oh, on my slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
And both Rob and I have a long history in chapter 21, various sections, so we know
Okay.
chapter 21D is hazardous waste, so
Okay.
Perked our ears up.
Sorry
apologize.
about that.
If the reference is correct in the actual bylaw change, it's not a problem for me, but the slide needs to be fixed.
Let's double check that right now to make sure we've got the correct reference in the bylaw.
Thank you. Sorry.
So, Counselor,
Hi, Rob.
through the chair. So does this counts? I'm assuming this counts as a zoning vote.
It
So,
does.
It's
Thirds.
gonna be 2/3.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't fall into the new majority rule.
No.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, and confirming that the reference to the 21D bylaw is chapter 40, section 21D.
Thank you.
I haven't spoken to Jay about it, but I think unless there is some contention with a specific zoning article, he will probably bundle them. So
You can't bundle 2/3 votes, Susan.
you can't, we went over this last time. You can, as long as you're not bundling it with a 50% vote, right, Blythe? Didn't we do this last time where we had to pull out the pieces of it that were 2/3 and we voted on everything else that was, Blythe, isn't that what we did last spring with the few zoning things that we had last spring with the B1 stuff?
I'm gonna have to go back and take a look at that, but I mean, generally, if it's a 2/3 vote, everything has to be 2/3.
That's what I'm saying. You could bundle them, but as long as everything is the same percentage, I think is what Jay said last year.
Yeah,
Let me just,
I'm going to object to anything that you try to pull out of a bundle, or you
no, this
try to
is,
put into a bundle for 2/3 votes.
aren't we doing one article?
I object to it generally, so
So when you say bundle, are you referring to the consent agenda?
yes.
Yes.
And I can't imagine Jay would put this on the consent agenda.
I
No.
wasn't-
No, last year what he did, somebody's gonna have to remind me exactly. I apologize for not having this in front of me, but bringing it up. With the B1 stuff last year, is Kevin on the call? Okay, no, I don't see him. Okay. He did something where he allowed us it all to be voted on together, like once the discussion happened, but he had to pull out, there was like one or two, there were only a 50% vote, a majority vote, and the rest were 2/3. So it's not the consent calendar, it's something else. And what it did was it allowed things to move smoother after the fact, even though they were all zoning changes. I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm just thinking how many there are, he may want to do that.
Susan, this is just one article.
You're having all of these under one article?
No,
Yes.
it's actually, there's 4 articles. There's kind of for the general bylaw, we're just going to renumber and rechapter everything. Then it's about a 6-page article, which identifies the specific changes we're going to make. And then the same for zoning. The first one for zoning is just we're going to rechapter and renumber everything, but that still requires a 2/3 vote.
Right.
And then there's a kind of a 6-page list of changes that all require 2/3 votes.
But he may not. And David, I'm assuming if you object to him doing it in the first place and we let him know that up front, he wouldn't even suggest it. So if that's your position, I'll make sure to relay that to him should he bring it up. He usually brings it up in the moderators meeting that we have like 2 weeks before. So if he does, I'll make sure to let him know that that's how you feel and ask him not to do that if you oppose it. I'm not saying he's going to. I just want to know what your stance is before.
No, I appreciate that, Susan, and I just don't think it's a smart idea.
Okay, I'll make sure. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, I don't get to make those decisions, but I will make sure that he understands that our board members would not like that to happen.
Thank you.
And go from there. Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Moving on. Rob, I think you were still getting your answers.
Yep, I would just note there's a couple of in Article 20. There are a few things we didn't cover in this PowerPoint.
Yeah.
That may lead questioners to say, well, okay, so this is the new auto freight storage definition. What was the old one?
Right.
I just think we have to prepare for that. Are there substantive changes, or is it truly Scrivener's and this sort of stuff?
Yeah, and I will tell you the kind of the truth. So the E-code, general code folks, it's a good product, but the process is not perfect. For instance, I would have loved to have delivered to you a red line of our current bylaw and our new bylaw, but a red line is not available. They won't do it. So, so I guess as we kind of head out on this tour, I'm open to suggestions, and if there's if there's certain things that you think we should go and redline ourselves, I'm open to that suggestion. I guess I'm here to present, but I'm also looking for help and suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about what that would cost. Sorry.
Yeah. We're trying to,
no, I like I
watch the
said at
bottom
the
line.
beginning of this whole process, my comments, I think this is the right thing to do.
Yep.
It absolutely makes total sense. I just fear as Rob referred to them, our persnickety attendees. So
I say with all affection, because I'm usually one of them.
and I was one of them too. Rob and I are both one of them at some point in our
You put
careers.
them on the advisory board, so they can't do that. So just looking at this, there's only a handful, like maybe a dozen of things that would spark anyone's curiosity.
Yeah.
So we do have the zoning bylaw online. Somebody could do a little side by side. I mean, I'm willing to do it and shoot it to you guys and see what you think about it, as a way just to, when whoever's playing Rob Garrity in the audience says, "What did you do with auto freight storage?"
Right.
That sounds like you're signing up to write the advisory board opinion on this, Rob, and then prepare to defend it when it comes up.
I serve at the pleasure of the chair.
So yeah, so if I look at definitions, I could maybe pick out 6 or 7 and just show the changes. Particularly, it's like, so there are red lines and, so there are strike throughs and underlines for some of them. But when we just, I think maybe if I just focused on what we just replaced, showing what we replaced, that could kind of keep it pretty simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hate to give you guys extra work.
It's only been 2 years. We want to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, the extra work is not making it to the finish line.
Yeah, that is actually my concern as well, frankly. Exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that this is easy at town meeting, or relatively easy at town meeting.
Yeah. And as someone who used to write zoning decisions, I really appreciate you losing all the H's and K's and J's and whatnot.
Good.
Really hard to reference.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay,
So with that, thank you very much. I'll put my head together with Blythe and Carol and Rich and Bob, and I assume maybe make some few additional minor changes and get that circulated again.
Yes,
Thank
please,
you.
Tom.
Yep. Thank you very much for your time. I
Thank you,
really
Tom.
appreciate it.
thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Right, thank you very much.
Okay, Blythe, did you have anything else relating to this, or should we move on to Dr. Alardi?
I think it would be nice to move on to Dr. Alardi, and then perhaps we can come back to any, since you now have a full warrant, any questions that people have about it after she's finished.
Okay, great.
Great. Thanks, Susan, and thanks to the advisory board for having us tonight. I apologize, I'm not feeling great, so I'm going to keep my camera off, but we do have several people here with us. Victoria Saldana, our Director of Curriculum Instruction for the Norfolk Schools, Barry Neckdow, our Business Consultant, and Medora Champagne, School Committee Vice Chair, and also Budget Subcommittee. What I thought we'd do tonight, I did send in advance to Erica, and I believe she sent out to all of you a copy of our budget presentation and a link to the public hearing on the budget. I know that just came out the other day, so I'm sure people probably haven't had time to study it carefully. So we thought we'd do an abbreviated presentation tonight, kind of walk through the driving budget drivers for the 22-23 school budget, and then have time to answer any questions you might have at the end. Does that sound okay to you, Susan?
Yes, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Is it possible, Erica, to make Vicky Saldana a co-host so she can share her screen?
Yep, screen sharing is open, so she should be able to do that.
Okay, I'm gonna let her, if she can pull the
Trying
budget.
to,
Okay.
I don't know if my computer's allowing me to do that. I apologize.
All right.
I'm getting some kind of a security alert.
See if Susan, I did share it with the committee. I don't know if you're able to open it for.
Yeah,
Which,
I can do that if you'd like.
yeah, just because for some reason it's not letting Vicky.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second to pull it up. I have two slides, FY 2023 and public budget hearing. Which one do you want me to open first?
The public budget hearing is the presentation. So if you can open that, we can just play it as a presentation.
Let me just close out of everything else before I start screen sharing. Okay. All right. Just give me 1 second. I've just got to find the button, share screen. Okay.
Perfect. All right.
Everybody seeing it?
See it as a handout view, but that's fine. So you can follow along from there.
Just let me know when you need me to move and I'll move it up as you go.
All right, perfect. So first, what I wanted to share again is that as we explain every year, our budget process is really driven by the district vision and mission statement. So every year we consider what all of our students' needs are. We look at enrollment, we look at staffing needs, and we work to make the best decisions that are going to have the highest return for our students in terms of student achievement. And as we were preparing the budget for the 2023 year, we were also thinking and considering what impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on our students and what we need to be mindful of in preparing to support their educational programming moving forward. Susan, you can scroll down. All right. For the presentation tonight, it's going to be divided into several sections. I think it's important, and we present this information to the advisory committee annually, but when we're thinking about the district budget, it's important to put it in the context of the long-term budget history, because the impact of the previous recession and past budget cuts has a long-standing impact as we are preparing budgets in terms of the cost of recovering lost positions and programming. We will talk a little bit about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on teaching and learning. Provide some per pupil spending comparisons so you can see how Norfolk educational dollars and spending compare to other like districts. And then we'll get into depth about the 2023 budget request and budget drivers. The advisory board has asked in the past if I would provide enrollment and class size projections, so that data is included tonight, as well as cost saving efforts and information about how the district is strengthening the value of educational dollars and spending, and how we are realizing and supplementing programming through competitive grants and other creative budget solutions. You can scroll down again. So as far as the budget history, if you're looking at slide 5, this is just every year for us to open our doors the way that we close in June, which means to bring forward the existing staff, maintain our average class sizes, absorb any contractual increases for contracts like bus transportation or out of district tuition costs. It typically takes the district 3%, about a 3% over the prior fiscal year. If you look at the budget history in Norfolk, as you're well aware, between the years of 2008 and 2013, there were significant budget cuts made, probably to all departments across the Commonwealth. But as far as the schools went, you can see in 2009, there was a 2% increase. 2010, it was a -1. It was a -3.1% in 11, a 0 budget in 12, and a 1.6 in fiscal 13. Again, with a 3% cost to just carry forward, you can see that those recession years really decimated the public schools. We lost a lot of programs, the Gifted and Talented program, the World Language program, a lot of staffing, teachers, paraprofessionals. Beginning in 2014, the state and the town were in much better financial positions. So between 2014 and 2023, we have been really working on rebuilding. I think it's important to note, again, the black line that goes through the screen shows you what the 3% look like. So we were getting slightly higher increases that allow us to start to chip away at what was lost during the recession. Also, though, during those rebuilding years, we've seen some significant enrollment growth. We have about 100 more students in the district over the last 3 to 4 years, which is at the same time as we're trying to rebuild, we've had to add classroom teaching positions and additional instructional supports. So the goal of this is just really to show you when there's significant recessions and cuts, it takes a long time to recoup those losses. You can go down to the next slide. If you look at the budget history over the past 15 years, the average budget increase from fiscal year to fiscal year is 2.79%. So again, that shows the challenges districts and departments face when trying to rebuild from difficult times. The COVID-19 impact of the budget, as the advisory board is well aware, I know we had several conversations during planning for fiscal 2021. It was an unprecedented time. The town and the state and the country had really no idea what impact the pandemic was going to have on revenues. There was a lot of uncertainty. And at that time, the town of Norfolk took a conservative approach, assuming revenues were going to be impacted and available fundings was going to be less than in prior years. We were asked to reduce the school budget by 1.8%, or about $231,000. We were able to do that year. And, I think we came forward and we're good partners with the town in trying to balance the budget at a difficult time. And we were able to absorb that for the short term because of the way school was structured during the pandemic, during the fiscal year 2021. So as you know, we had a hybrid learning model. We only had, for the majority of the year, about half our students in the building at any given time. We were able to absorb, we didn't fill assistant principal positions. We lost a technology integration specialist, a library teacher. But again, students weren't traveling through the building because of COVID protocols. They weren't visiting the library. So we were able to absorb those losses for one single year. When we returned to school this year, the town was in a better position. We had about a 5% budget increase that we brought forward last year. That allowed us to bring back most of the cuts, with the exception of a school psychology position. We were not able to fund that. Vicki is going to talk in a little bit about some creative revenue sources and how we were able to address that need. You can go down again, Susan.
Actually, before we step off, if I could just ask one quick question on there. It said that the budget reduced in FY21. Then on the earlier slide, you showed it was an increase of 2.1. Can you walk through and reconcile those two statements?
Yeah, so we had brought forward a budget request that was about 4.75, and the town couldn't fund it. So the 1.8 reduction was off of the 4.75, off of our initial ask. In order to balance that, we had to cut those technology positions, school library and assistant principals. So what we received was a 2.6% increase. Versus the 4.75 we really needed to operate.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Okay, so yeah, it did. I just want to make sure everyone was tracking that wasn't off of the prior year budget. That was off of the budget request for FY20.
Budget request that would have allowed us at that time to maintain level services. Yeah.
Right. Great. Thanks.
Sure. I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, we've been very mindful in our planning that while our teachers and our staff did an outstanding job throughout this entire pandemic, and we've done the best that we can to deliver strong instruction, the impact of COVID-19 is real. We have seen a widespread national and local and state research, a significant impact on student mental health. Students were certainly more isolated when they were home learning remotely. We've seen an increase in anxiety, depression among youth following school closures. And that is not just in Norfolk, that is widespread. We've also known that some curriculum areas were more strongly impacted than others. Mathematics was an area that was harder for students to access and fully understand and comprehend and develop advanced skills in mathematics through a remote platform. They had less opportunity to work with hands-on manipulatives and to explore those concepts in depth. So we know that mathematics was an area that was more significantly impacted than our reading and our literacy scores. In planning to address those needs for fiscal 2022, Vicki's going to talk about how we use state ESSER funds to address the most critical needs. So I'll turn it over to Vicki, and Susan, you can scroll down for her.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective from the teaching and learning lens, and what are some of the drivers that are kind of forming our budget requests. So this past school year, we used ESSER funds to add positions that we knew based on research and our own district data were critical to address the impact the COVID-19 pandemic had on our students, as Dr. Lardy mentioned, both academically and from a social emotional perspective. The state released some ESSER funds that we were able to fund these positions through this past school year, but they are not continuing. So, these positions still remain critical, and therefore we needed to incorporate them into our working budget. Can you go down to, so it's a 0.8 school psychologist, a 0.5 social worker, and a 1.0 developmental math teacher. All those positions were, like I said, were really thoughtfully chosen because those are the three areas that we saw the biggest impact that the pandemic had on our students returning to school and with their academics. So social emotional learning is a big focus for our schools, and our mental health team has made enhancements to our programming this school year in order to help support our students with the unique needs that the pandemic had presented. So this year, the district added a full-time school psychologist and a part-time social worker to support increased social emotional instruction, help support family outreach, and counseling to meet the needs of our students, as well as our families. Additional time and effort has been dedicated to building community, supporting students with building interpersonal skills and with returning to school. That's one of the biggest areas we saw regression, like I said, not just in Norfolk, but across the board. With the way the schoolings had to be set up last year, students really lost in terms of just being able to be used to being in a school building 5 days a week for 6 hours a day, and what does that look like, and kind of also their ability to develop interpersonal skills, like all of those kind of things that come as part of the schoolings, not only the academics. Our students had very limited exposure to the past 2 years, and we really needed to provide extra support in those areas to kind of help them reacclimate to what it's like to be in school with 500 other kids. So that's why we had such a big emphasis placed on our social emotional learning programs. Next slide, please. So in terms of academics, mathematics is, as I'm sure everybody can sympathize, is a very challenging subject to teach online because it's such a hands-on type of a curriculum, especially at the elementary levels. And that was really challenging to deliver for our teachers in a hybrid setting. Even though we've really leveraged technology, and our teachers did an amazing job with what they were able to, how we're able to shift our curriculum, but it still does not replace being in person. So like, even though, like I said, our teachers are doing technology at a very high level, like those lack of opportunities with hands-on practice has made it more challenging for students to retain and in some cases master those skills. So being able to offer additional support to our students and teachers with unfinished learning, we added a 1.0 math specialist position, but it's still an area that we require additional support in, especially in our with our upper grades where the academics is a lot more challenging. There's a lot more new skills that are being introduced that our students need additional support with. So when we recognize that we really need to kind of add as much support as we can in this area through, like I said, math specialists and math interventionists, which is one of the budget requests that we have on our list. I think the next part, Dr. Lardy is going to talk about the per pupil cost comparison, if there's no questions.
Jump down to that. So again, the advisory board has typically asked how spending in Norfolk compares to other like communities. And this is just a slide that shows you Norfolk per pupil spending compared to the state. So back in 2013, right as we were coming out of the recession, you can see that Norfolk was spending on average about $1,000 less per pupil in educational dollars. We made some progress in closing that gap in the 2015-2016 year. And then again, even though we were seeing increases, budget increases annually of around 4%, we also saw corresponding enrollment increases. So from 2016 through 2020, the gap in spending between Norfolk and the state has actually grown. It's closer to $2,000. 2020, just so you know, is the last data that is available and has been released by the state. Per pupil spending is the best comparison source from district to district because it includes all funds that the district receives and is based on your end of year financial report, which is required by law to be audited by a private audit company. And so every grant that we received, the town contribution to spending, all of that is considered in the end of year report, which is where the state draws this data from. They have not released the 2021 report, and I think they are still truing up district spending through the multiple grants that were offered for COVID relief. But this is the last available data that we have. Again, during that fiscal year, we did make a budget reduction. So our 2021 was a 2.6. So I would anticipate when that data is released, we will see that gap grow. Susan, you can scroll down again. This is just a comparison of average per pupil expenditure against the communities that the state identifies as our like comparison communities. Part of the reason that these select districts are chosen is because they are elementary only districts, although some go K-8, but they do not include a high school. So it is again, a more direct comparison of per pupil costs. You can see that Norfolk is second to the bottom in terms of per pupil spending, with only Berkeley below us. We are currently spending close to about $1,600 less than Plainville, and a bigger gap between what we're spending and Rentham is spending. You can scroll down again. Again, just for comparison purposes, if Norfolk were spending the state average, we're right now $1,622 less per pupil than the state average. If we were spending what the state average per pupil cost is with our current enrollment of 1,009 students, it would be over $1.5 million more in our current budget request. Susan, you can go down one more. One other point of that I wanted to clarify for the advisory board too, is that we do have two significant charter schools that are in our catchment area. So the Benjamin Franklin Classical Charter School in Franklin, a couple of years ago, they expanded their charter from 450 to 750 students K-8. And then the Foxborough Regional Charter School takes students from kindergarten through grade 12, and they have 1,630 students. It is critical, not just because the children of Norfolk deserve a high quality education. It is critical that we maintain strong educational programs, including the arts, wellness, all of our other specialized subjects, because parents have the option of opting to send their child to a charter school. And state aid follows that student. So for every student that chooses to attend the charter school in Franklin or in Foxborough, the town of Norfolk loses approximately $15,000 in state funding. So if you lose 3 or 4 students, you're talking about the cost of a teacher there. So maintaining strong programs helps us keep our kids in district and helps make sure that state aid is going to the town and in turn to our schools. After this, I think you can scroll it down, and I'm going to, can you just scroll down one more, Susan? I think I'm going to turn it to Barry to talk about the 2023 budget request and budget drivers.
Thank you very much, and it's nice to be here. So our request this year is for a budget of $14,462,309, or $710,976 above the FY22 budget, or an increase of 5.17%. So what does this request allow us to do? First and foremost, and most importantly, it allows us to maintain level services. So it doesn't include new programming. We meet our contractual obligations, and that's both personnel costs as well as our supplies and service contracts, mainly our bus transportation. It allows us to maintain the critical grant funded positions we have for grants, particularly the COVID related grants that are going away after this fiscal year. It allows us to bring the much needed positions back into the operating budget. Also allows us to address our special education staffing and growth in our global development delay and autism program, and that's student growth. It allows us to hire an additional 0.5 ELL teacher, which provides mandated language instruction to our growing population of English language learners. And it also allows us to manage cost increases in supplies, things like cleaning, custodial, paper supplies, all that are rising fairly rapidly. I think we all are aware of that. And it also allows us to restore a clerical reduction that we made a couple of years ago. Next slide, please. Thank you. The next slide gives a little bit deeper look into our contractual obligations. And when I say that, I mean our staffing contractual obligations. As you can see, to roll our staff forward, that's our existing staff forward, it's $402,895 or 2.93%. So that includes rolling the teachers forward on the comp grid, and then all increases for everybody else in the district. We also take into account a couple of retirements and the substantial savings that we received by replacing the retired teachers with the lower salaries on the grid. So 2.93% of our request of 5.17% is to manage our contractual obligations into 2023. Next slide, please. This slide looks at the positions, the staffing positions that we are requesting in the budget. There are a total of 6 FTEs on this particular page, broken into 2 sections: additions and then positions that we're bringing in from the Assert grant. The total is about 2.35%. And as I mentioned, much of it deals with addressing needs either in our student services areas or related to COVID positions related to COVID, things like providing additional speech and language therapy, additional occupational therapy. I mentioned the ELL teacher, a math professional to address our learning loss from math, and then down below are positions that Vicki mentioned that were in the Assert grant that we want to bring back into the operating budget to continue those services that are no longer funded in the grant. This particular page is $323,000 or 2.35% of the 5.17%. So the combination of our contractual obligations and positions on this particular page, the 6 FTEs, that equals 5.28% increase in the budget. Next page, please. Next slide, please.
Yes, sorry, I was trying to unmute. I have one quick question. Your 1.6 instructional paraprofessional, is that taking one we already have to full-time and adding an additional one full-time, or is it adding 3 part-time?
It's actually 1.6. So those are in the special education COVID relief grant. So it's actually not new hires. It's instructional professionals providing services today and just moving them from the special education COVID relief grant back into the operating budget. So it's two people that two individuals, but 1.6 FTEs that exist today.
Okay.
I can just add to
Shouldn't
that.
they be in the budget on the lower budget then?
They weren't funded through Assert, which is a
Okay.
specific grant that was COVID relief. The Department of Education, after the school year started, recognized that the impact of COVID was more significant for some of our students that have specialized needs. So they offered some supplemental funding to offset that. And we, during the year of hybrid and remote learning, we had a significant increase in new students enrolling in the district who came in with existing IEPs who had additional support services. So we used some of the additional relief funding that the Department of Ed made available to offset special education costs, but it wasn't ESSER. So that's why it's listed outside of the ESSER grant. But you are correct that those are positions that currently exist, just separated through a different grant.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, go on.
Thank you. Thanks. As I mentioned, the previous two slides recognize a budget increase of 5.28%. And to get down to the 5.17% increase, all other expenses total a decrease of about $15,000, primarily made up in special education costs related to students that we will no longer be responsible for after June 30th. So they'll move on to the responsibility of another district, principally King Philip. So we have actually have a reduction here, which is fairly substantial in special education, which helps us offset increases in things like transportation, facilities, technology, and just regular supplies and services that we need to run our district. So this page is, as it says, a reduction of $14,000, almost $15,000, or 0.11% decrease, which all summed together equal our increase of 5.17%. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just three different looks on the next three slides of our budget increase and our budget in total. On this particular page, it just takes the increase and breaks it down a different way. The first category is contractual. So as I mentioned, contractual generally is salary, but if you add services to it, our total contractual obligations rolling forward is about 3%. There's another 0.97% in COVID recovery. So those are expenses related to COVID, things like the social worker increase and the psychologist increase that would fall into the 0.97% category. Special education and student services, 0.85. So that would be things like reductions in tuitions, but an increase in costs related to preschool, where we have a request for a 1.0 teacher to handle our increase in enrollment in preschool. In the other category, 0.28% are facilities and tech increases. And then lastly, the restoration is a 0.2 restoration of an administrative assistant in the office over at Freeman Kennedy. So that's just another breakdown of the budget request. Next slide, please.
So I have a quick question on that. I noticed contractual changes are greater than the average budget increase year over year for the last 15 years. Like at some point we should be able to plan for that. If our contracts have knowable increases, we should no longer refer to historical averages as meaningful if our contracts require a different piece, or if the historical average is pulled down from the recession, which was not a level service historical average. It can anchor people to a number that is not realistic given known obligations that carry from one year to the next. So nothing to change here, no specific, it's just how do we tell the story in a way that sets it up for the correct expectations on what it takes to run the schools.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Brian. One thing I would say is that the contractual increase this year is slightly higher than it has been in the past. And part of that reflects that we have existing people that we've contracted with this year through the Assert grant that are now moving into the operating budget that we have to. So it's not just their increase, but the position as a whole that's driving that cost a little bit. But I think you're right. The cost of 3% is what we've typically talked about as what's required to bring the district forward. But I mean, we're now experiencing significant supply chain issues. The cost of our food service program, our paper, all of our products, as well as fuel and oil, everything is going up. So I do think that's a number that we'll have to look at going forward to see what truly the new average might look like. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And it is, I think I have a variation of the same comment that David had before, which is the COVID recovery as a category and ESSER as a separate COVID related grant is a bit confusing when some of those recovery pieces are put into base budget and others are looked at as a recovery piece. So if it's confused a couple of us here, it should be something to highlight for town meeting as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is a breakdown of the entire budget, and it's broken down in categories. These are mainly the salaries are three categories: the blue, the dark red, and the other salaries are in green. And it just shows you that salaries for us are 88.2% of our budget. And then everything else, as you can see, the categories get quite small. The slices of the pie get quite small. That's everything else, like services, supplies, other expenses, including our out-of-district tuitions are a category, and in our district, a very small one, which we're very fortunate that we have programming in our schools, so that we have to send less students out. Oh, that's very nice to blow it up that way. Last slide for me is again another, if you don't mind going forward, is another slide telling much the same story, that if you add together what I think about our fixed costs, and that's salaries, transportation, tuition, and utilities, that's about 94% of our budget. So that leaves roughly 6% of our budget for everything else. So that's supplies, services, everything else that falls into that category. So you can see we have very little to deal with, about 6% to cover things like curriculum materials, textbooks, supplies, paper, and other expenses. So it really highlights how much of our budget is really needed on a day-to-day basis to run the district, and really it can't really be looked at to reduce it. I'm going to hand the presentation back to Dr. O'Lardy, who's going to address enrollment and class sizes.
All right. Again, the advisory board has asked in the past for information about the projected class sizes. We can put together these calculations based on our current enrollment. So this is looking at the current number of students enrolled at every grade level, except for kindergarten, and kindergarten is based on projected enrollment. We have moved our kindergarten registration timeline forward. So we now have students and families register for kindergarten in January, so that by the end of February, we have a really good estimate of what our entering kindergarten class will look like. So we are projecting that we will need 7 kindergarten teachers. We'll have class size averages of 20.7, or so, some classes of 20, some of 21. First grade, we are going to go down a teacher. And again, we look at the teaching positions every single year, and we move teachers in based on enrollment trends. So you'll see where it says a -1, that means that we're going to reduce a first grade teacher based on enrollment for next year. We anticipate 147 students. That would be a class size of 21. We do have to add a teacher to grade 2. We have 161 students moving up. In order to keep that class within class size policy limits, we'll be adding an 8th session of grade 2. We have 6 third grades this year, and I'll have 6 again next year with a class size of 21. We will be adding a 7th teacher to 4th grade next year, 133 students with an average class size of 19. We are going down a 5th grade teacher, again, class size of 21.5, and we will continue with 7 6th grades at 136 with an average class size of 19.4. You can scroll down again. Again, this is those same communities that are identified as our like community comparison communities. And this just shows you what the average class size in the elementary schools have been for the last 3 years. Again, our class sizes are within the school committee policy limits. However, they're not on the lower end. Our class sizes are really pretty consistently at the upper end of our comparison group with an average size from this year of 19. Next slide. Again, as I talked about earlier, we have the investment in educational dollars in Norfolk lags behind the average per pupil cost at the state level and also among our local comparison districts. We have been very creative and actively sought ways to manage costs so that we can invest those educational dollars directly in student supports and in staffing and in curriculum and materials. So some of the things that we have done for the cost savings efforts in terms of planning for fiscal 2023, as you know, we have a shared facilities director and deputy director that we share with the town. Merging those positions into one department saves the school annually about $45,000. We also have a shared HVAC maintenance support position. Unfortunately, currently it's vacant and we are struggling to fill it, but optimistically, if we are able to fill that next year, based on the number of service calls we had this year, and especially with COVID, where we were very, very careful about making sure our HVAC systems and our ventilation and everything was working smoothly. Based on those estimates and the hourly rate for bringing somebody in, we probably saved close to $65,000 this year, and we would anticipate that need to continue going into next year by having somebody on staff. Energy efficiency upgrades to the H. Olive Day School, which were fully funded through the Green School Community Grant that the town pursued, led to about $145,000 in savings at H. Olive Day. And we anticipate that to go forward. We have a shared custodial position that we've developed with the town, and that work schedule is staggered. So it's a Tuesday through Saturday position. And so we no longer have to pay overtime when we have programming or things running on the weekends. We save about $5,000. This past year, we regionalized the school lunch program, and we now share a director of school food services and an assistant director with Plainville and with Rentham. By merging those departments, we've seen better purchasing power for all three districts, but we're also saving about $18,000 in next year's budget on salary for that position. We regularly cost share professional development. There's a lot of mandated professional development programming we have to provide annually for the teachers and for staff. And we partner with Rentham and King Philip and Plainville in order to offer that at a reduced cost. Again, you'll see where our tuition, we saw some savings in special ed tuitions next year. And we also have some additional costs because we have to expand our global developmental delays program in order to meet the needs of students that are currently with us or that are arriving in September or the early part of next year. We need to hire an additional preschool teacher, a severe special education with a severe special education license to run that program. But by hiring our own staffing, we are able to meet the needs of many of these new students in district. By keeping students in district and not tuitioning students out, we will save $269,000 in tuition costs next year. And that's after deducting the cost of the new teacher and support staff. Again, this year we brought in about $100,000 in competitive grant writing that funds a couple of positions, as well as parent education nights, professional development programming, digital learning programming for students. So altogether, that's about close to $668,411 in anticipated savings going forward. You can scroll down one more time, Susan. There are staffing needs that we have that are not included in this budget. We recognize that the town is struggling to balance the budget and that there's many needs across the board of all departments. When we talked about a building secretary restoration a couple of years ago, we cut the support staff in the Freeman Kennedy front office by 0.4, which is 2 full days a week. We are only looking to add back part of that right now. It's very difficult to operate that building without sufficient office support. So we're looking only to restore part of that right now. We also have, an increasing population of students with special educational needs. The testing demands that we are required to provide testing and evaluation within a certain timeline are continuing to grow, and it's difficult for us to manage that with existing staff, but we are not going to bring forward at this time a request for additional support with educational evaluations. We have had a special education building substitute who covers when we have teachers involved in team meetings or when we have teachers out in maternity leaves or for daily because they're out sick. We are not going to be able to restore that position. We had to reallocate that person to a paraprofessional position to meet the needs of students' IEPs, and we are not going to bring forward another request. What we talked about earlier, and I think, Brian, you brought up the point in terms of COVID recovery. The COVID recovery section of our budget is the positions that were in ESSER. So that is primarily composed of those 3 positions. The only addition we are looking, because the math was mostly impacted at the upper grade levels, we are looking to add 1.5 math paraprofessional, which is a half-time person to be in the district 5 mornings a week to provide some additional support to students at those upper grades. So that's the only additional COVID recovery position beyond the Assert Grants. We aren't asking for a full-time, which we really need. So 0.5 is still left on the wish list. Again, we only have 2 district break-fix technology staff members who also have multiple other responsibilities in terms of website management, network management, infrastructure, and they support an environment of over 1,000 users. That is well below the industry standard, which is usually 1 person for every 250 users. So that department is stretched really thin, but we recognize that we can't bring that forward at this time. And again, we used to have full-time library assistants in both libraries to support circulation and programming for students. We only have 0.8 people right now, so we don't have full-time staff members. We would love to restore that and bring the library program back to where they were. But again, we aren't asking for that at this time. Can you scroll down one more, Susan? And expense needs. Our paraprofessional staff work 182 days. Our teachers work 183. Some of those non-student days are full-day professional development where we're providing training on new curriculum, new programs, social emotional supports for students and staff. Our paraprofessionals are not able to participate in all of the professional development programming days, but to add an additional day would be about 6,100, which we don't have in this budget. We have also really wanted to eliminate the band fees. I think I brought that to you guys for probably 5 or 6 years. We would like the band program to be free to all of our children, but currently we are funding part of the band teacher salary through band fees, and we have not been able to eliminate those. And we also, during the during the COVID year, when we made cuts to the budget, we had to cut our district curriculum adoption line down. So we have very little funding in that line. We do have to review our English language arts instructional program, and there's going to be a cost to any curriculum updates. So we are going to have to look at bringing that line back up by about $40,000 in order to fund a new curriculum adoption coming in the future. But we're going to delay that a year. So about 70,000 of expense needs that we are not bringing forward at this time. And then I'm going to turn it back to Vicki just to talk a little bit about the return on investment of educational dollars in Norfolk. So Vicki, you want to close that out?
Yeah.
Excuse me, sorry. Before we move on, can I ask a couple of questions and see if anyone else has any questions concerning this, just so we don't forget them?
Yep.
Okay. My first one is, I realize that it's not ideal, but in the meantime, until we reach a point where we can restore the building secretary, can you guys utilize volunteers? I know right now you haven't released volunteers to come back into the school, but considering the kids are at school without masks on at this point, I would think that you could have volunteers at least in masks or bring vaccination records with them or something, because I have a ton of, I know this is off topic slightly, but I do have a ton of volunteers who would be willing to fill in as, they don't just want to volunteer with their children, they would be willing to volunteer in the office doing some of the secretarial work.
So we are going to be looking at being allowed to have volunteers come back into the building. That's a school committee topic for the April meeting. And as, again, we lifted the mask mandate as students returned from February vacation. We were monitoring case counts to see how we responded to that change, and we are going to be looking at additional protocols in April. So we do anticipate, we often use libraries to volunteers to help in the library and to help in the lunchroom and recess supervision. So we will be looking at that. A lot of the material that the secretaries are responsible for managing is confidential student record. So there's a lot of things that they can't support, that volunteers can't support. But there's certainly some things that we would be able to, you know, copying and other things. And we have done that in the past. We anticipate that we will be looking to do that again.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, I think. It's probably been a while, but I know that there was a pool of parents who helped out with secretarial stuff at the schools. So I'd be interested in compiling a list for you of vaccinated parents who've been Corey checked and signed confidentiality waivers, obviously, as well. I'm not saying they need to be doing confidential work, but I'm just trying to help figure out how some of these things don't necessarily have to go in. I mean, they're not in the budget right now, and how we can get around providing those services until we can reach a point where they can go into the budget.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely think we rely a lot on our parent volunteers. We have a great, strong PTO. We have a lot of parents that are interested in helping out. And so we definitely would look to that, Susan. I think, again, we've delayed that based on COVID protocols and our contact tracing and all of the requirements that we have, but we are going to look at that again in April. So that might be a way that we can provide some support. But I do think that we definitely have to work towards that full position, because student discipline, students being dismissed, students coming in late to school, we have, there's a lot of work that the secretaries do that we cannot share with other parents or volunteers.
Okay, and then my second question is, with back-to-back years of over a 5% increase, paired with our increase in enrollment, do you think that is going to help improve our per pupil spend compared to previous years?
Honestly, I think because the 2021 data has not come out yet, and that was a year that we were looking at a 2.6, I think the gap probably grew that year. Other towns and communities didn't take the same approach Norfolk took, a conservative fiscal approach. So I know Rentham and other communities were looking at higher increases that year. I think the 5% will help a little bit this year, but I think it's going to be pretty flat. I don't think we're going to see a significant closing of that per pupil spending gap at this point.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions related to what we've discussed so far, which is the budget and the cost savings and the per pupil spending and things not included in the budget? Anything on those topics before I turn it back over to Vicki? I can't see hands raised because I'm screen sharing, so just go ahead and speak up if you do.
I have a few. It's Rob, but I could wait until the end of the presentation.
It's totally up to you, whichever you prefer.
We're only a few slides away from the end.
Okay.
I figure let's let them go.
All right, great. All right, Vicki, go ahead.
I'll make it brief. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of positives too. So I think, like, we all know that Norfolk has always demonstrated high standards and achievement for students. Based on state and local data, our students continue to outperform the state. One of the things that we're very proud of is that we offer an outstanding arts education program and a robust physical education program that includes health classes, which is really a gift for our students. And one of the things that we also can kind of, celebrate is that all of them were uninterrupted during the pandemic, which I know a lot of other districts struggled with, to be able to continue with the arts program. And as we all know, that is just as vital for our kids as math and English language arts. Our buildings are also clean and safe and well maintained, so our students have a learning environment that they can be successful in, which is really a testament to our facilities folks that have worked tremendously hard to maintain our buildings, especially during the pandemic. Can you go to the, our majority of our teachers are also highly qualified, and we really do have a very low turnover rate, which like I said, is another really unique thing about Norfolk. So in terms of just MCAS data, I just wanted to share As you can see, our scores from the last couple of years, you'll notice that our district continues to outperform the state in the area of students' achievement in English language arts. This is also supported by our district level data. The data shows that our students in grades 2 through 6 performed just as strongly in this curriculum area in 2019 as they did in 2020, which is very encouraging given the interrupted learning we faced during the past school year. Next slide, please. As we've mentioned before, the pandemic did have a more significant impact on the scores in mathematics, as you clearly can see. This is an effect that, again, we've not only been unique to Norfolk, it is nationwide in the subject area, just because I think given the content of the area and how students, the type of environment that students need to be in to be able to learn it most effectively. We anticipate this outcome and have made adjustments to our curriculum and instruction in order to address this unfinished learning. And one of our, like I said, key components that we added is the additional math support that is so vital, especially in our upper elementary grade levels. And I think just to wrap it up, I think research does show that it will take time for students and schools to fully address the effects of the pandemic, but I feel like we definitely have the tools to mitigate the long-term effects, and our teachers are trained and are skilled to do so with the right supports in place. And I'll turn it back to Dr. Lardy.
All right, so we're happy to take any questions that anybody might have, and Medora is also on the call if you have questions for school committee, and we can take it from there.
I will leave the screen sharing up just in case anyone wants me to go back to a specific slide.
Great.
Go ahead. Anyone we can start with Rob, since I know he had questions.
Dr. Alardi, forgive me for the basic questions, but this is my first year on the committee. In the section about charter schools, we talk about charter kids leaving, taking away state aid, and you mentioned the number 15,000, but the state aid is like 3,500 a kid. The rest of it's Norfolk money. Does 15,000 walk out with each charter kid, or is it just the 3,500 state aid?
No, that's the assessment to the town for students that go to a charter school. The town is assessed for that.
So they take the state aid and the local contribution?
They do.
Okay. Yikes.
Anyone else?
A question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Dr. Lardy, thank you for being here. Appreciate it as always. My question is related to something I saw in the other slide deck and something that I didn't hear us touch on tonight, which was facilities, specifically related to the HL of day. And on that page where it goes in the other document that goes, starts with the district and then it goes to, each of the schools. Something that's mentioned is overcrowding. And
yeah.
Do you mind just talking a little bit more about that and where things stand and if there are any costs that we should expect down the road there?
Happy to talk about that. I wasn't sure whether you wanted us to address that tonight, Susan, but the schools have, since 2017, we've been working with the town to better understand the impact of the development on enrollment in schools. So we had a space study committee that was with the previous town administrator, the building inspector, the rec department, members of the school committee, and we've been looking at all of the 40B projects, all of the housing development, and what that was going to mean for our students. We have been projecting that we would be at a critical space shortage. And so we've applied multiple years now. We're going into our third year of applying for state funding for a school expansion project. The proposal that's on the table is to expand the Freeman Kennedy School by adding a connecting wing between the two back wings of the building. The building was originally designed to have that opportunity for expansion should districts need it, because it's a model plan for the state. The goal, if we are able to expand the Freeman, would be we would move the preschool and early childhood and special education offices out of the H. Olive Day School to the first floor of the addition, which would create space at the H. Olive Day School. And it would have a second floor, which would add 9 classrooms to the Freeman Kennedy. So in one small construction project, we would be able to meet the future needs and address the space shortage at both buildings. We had NESDEC put together an enrollment projection study for us back in 2017. That study was projecting that the district would see over 10 years, about 250 more students coming. The first 3 years of those projections were really spot on. We saw that the projections for last year and this year were a little bit higher than what we saw in actual enrollment. It's very difficult to know whether that's a change that is directly driven by the pandemic, and the increased costs for construction have slowed down some of the development. So we have just recently contracted with NESDEC to do a brand new enrollment study. We know that over the past 4 years, we have brought in over 100 new students. If you look at class sizes of 20, that's about 5 classrooms, and we expect that to continue. At the H. Olive Day, we do have significant overcrowding now. We are using all available classroom spaces. We converted the teacher's copy room a few years back to a classroom space. We closed in the server room and are using that second half of that classroom as an instructional space. Last year, we lost our library, our computer lab media center. Now we have a technology specialist who is housed on the stage at the H. Olive Day, who travels from classroom to classroom with laptop carts and engineering design projects that she brings. Next year, we do have to expand our global developmental delays in preschool programming. And so we will likely not have a music room at H. Olive Day, which means that music will have to transition to being delivered in the same format on a cart from class to class with the teacher traveling. So we are at a critical space shortage at H. Olive Day now. As those students roll up, we are very quickly going to be out of space at the Freeman Kennedy School. So we applied to the Mass School Building Authority to try to get funding to support that expansion project. When MSBA participates, they generally fund 50% of the project, so it's significant savings. We were declined twice. We will reapply, but we are also bringing forward to the advisory board for consideration a warrant article asking the town to appropriate $150,000 for a feasibility study. Because if we are not invited to participate with MSBA, I think the town is going to have to make the decision in the near future to move forward independently. And the feasibility study will be able to give you very concrete numbers of estimates for construction costs. We'll be able to assess any ADA upgrades that we would need to do because we're expanding the building. Would look at stormwater and it would look at what it's going to cost us to tie into existing mechanical systems. So that data will be really critical for the town to have. If we are invited into MSBA, it's our hope that if we are able to work with an architect that they typically approve, that many aspects of the feasibility study would not have to be repeated. But because of the pandemic, especially, there's over 50% of the schools in Massachusetts have significant building needs, need to be replaced. Many don't have appropriate ventilation or HVAC systems. Those schools and buildings that are have significant safety concerns are getting priority. So I think there's a very good likelihood that we will not be invited to work with MSBA, and the town will need to make some additional decisions at that time. So it's probably more than you wanted, but if you go on our website, you can see the presentation, full presentation we made to the select board, and the design plans for the expansion. All of those are on our website.
Can I ask a question of Dr. Lardy on that?
Yep.
So how much smaller is Freeman Kennedy than Freeman Centennial in terms of classrooms?
Oh gosh, you know what? I would have to look into that for you, Rob. I don't know because I came after the Freeman Centennial was knocked down, so I don't know that off the top of my head. I've been at Freeman Kennedy for the time that I've been there.
Okay,
I don't know square footage.
1,200 students at one point.
Well, there's a couple of things that happened that have changed the space demands for the school. One, you used to have half-day kindergarten. So when you have half-day kindergarten, you have 2 kindergarten classrooms in 1 physical space.
Right.
The changing of that, when you're looking at 8 kindergartens, that's a significant number of additional classrooms.
Right.
We also have had an increase in our special education programming in district that requires additional space. The art and music programs have changed significantly. So there's a lot of different drivers that impact that space need.
Got it.
May I ask a question, Susan?
Of course.
Dr. Alardi, or actually Blythe or whoever, where has this been, where's the select board on the school budgets, both school budgets at this point? Meaning,
So we're going to be discussing the budget next week. The select board scheduled a special meeting on the 29th to talk about it. Right now, with the budget as requested and all the other town side budgets, we're just under $209,000 out of balance.
right.
So we're trying to close that gap.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yep, go ahead.
So along those lines, by my count, some of the COVID recovery positions, if you just take the ones that we mentioned as COVID-19, the Assert grant, and maybe something else. I mean, you're up to like 133 right there. Is there any appetite to use the COVID special revenue to cover that? Because if it is truly a COVID expense, right? Even if it's a 5-year expense to work everyone through the system who had been here through COVID and had been impacted by COVID, you could still handle that with the multi-year COVID funds.
So Rob, as far as the school grants for COVID recovery, they've expired. They're not extending. So
Yeah,
that's,
Do you mean ARPA? Do you
Yeah,
mean
I'm
the
talking about
ARPA
this-
funds?
No, it's not ARPA.
No.
You can, well, we have revenue replacement money, don't we? Which is, you can be used for anything.
Yeah, I think he's speaking of the $3 million that's in the ARPA fund.
Yeah. You can use revenue replacement for all purposes, most purposes.
Blythe would need to speak to that. I don't know how the town is using all of the ARPA funds. So I'd turn to Blythe on that.
We're working on our plans for that, but our goal really is to spend it on non-reoccurring costs, because otherwise it's just a bigger, a bigger lift to get those things back into the budget with town dollars when those funds are no longer available. We're trying to target them for things across the whole town that are capital basically in nature and not likely to come up again as easily, or are focused in the categories of water, stormwater, and possibly sewer.
Yeah, although that stormwater cleaning thing sounds like a regular maintenance expense and not a one-time.
The cleaning is a very small part of it. It's the phosphorus production measures and that sort of thing that's going to be a big increase. That's our real focus for next year.
Yeah.
If I could just make a point, I mean, from my perspective as a school committee member, and we struggled significantly with this budget, and I feel very strongly about it. And I think the rest of the committee does as well. The Assert grants, and I think I've said this previously, the fact that the Assert grants went away doesn't mean that the need goes away, right? Because we have students, you don't just kind of flip a switch and say, okay, COVID's over, everybody come, act like it's March 10th, 2020 again, and everything's fine. But some of those, my hope would be that they don't necessarily need to be reoccurring
Forever.
Expenses in the budget moving forward. If you look at our math scores from standardized testing, we dropped 15 percentage points on MCAS math testing. Like that's not a small dip. The math specialists, and it's a direct correlation to COVID. And I don't necessarily think, how long it will take to bridge that gap back. I don't know. And we won't know until when do we get the MCAS scores from this year, Ingrid? In October, November?
It'll be October, but we do have district benchmarks, but we do think it's going to be a multi-year effort. But as to your point, some of these things might not be long-term needs. They are directly addressing current needs.
I want to
And
be
I
clear.
think I think Rob's point was,
Yeah.
frankly, that if it's a short-term need and we have short-term dollars, maybe they could be applied.
And I'm agreeing. I'm not sure these are
Right.
huge, I don't think this is a decade's worth of expense we're talking about. I do think it will be more than 1 year.
Oh, yeah.
Whether or not it's 4 years or 6 years or however long, I don't know. But if there is revenue replacement, COVID related revenue replacement funding that is available, I know the school committee would be happy to look into that.
I think if it came down to the choice between us not recognizing what happened during COVID and not hiring the math specialists we need and not dealing with the kids, their social reintegration, if it came between choice of not doing that or using COVID money to cover for 2 or 3 or 4 years of that, I'd be much more in favor of using the COVID money to cover that, with the understanding from the school that this doesn't get thrown into the base and now we just, kind of build on it year over year. This is a special COVID thing. If it came down to the choice between cutting it or using the COVID, I'd be much more in favor of using the COVID money.
I would say, we did look very, very closely at the budget, and what you're seeing in the ask are things that we think are critically needed. And given the current situation that we're in. So I would agree that I don't think any of the committee members, and I couldn't in good faith say to you, any of these things could be cut right now and say that we're going to be able to meet what the needs of the students are coming forward.
No, they can't be cut. Speaking as, the school committee is tasked with serving the best interests of the students in this district. We have, anecdotal data and hard data insofar as we have, benchmark results. We have an increase in the needs of special education learners. We have an increase in ELL learners, and we have clear correlation between COVID and math deficiency at this point. We would not be performing our duty if we cut this budget this year. And I, personally, I'm saying that, as the vice chair of the school committee, that is how I personally feel. I know that those were the sentiments when the committee voted on this after the public hearing earlier this month as well, that while it is a high budget, we understand that a number that starts with a 5 is not an attractive number. It is, for all of its, for the size of it, a lean budget relative to the needs that are being faced by the district at this point.
And in terms, if I can just add, you mentioned the benchmark assessment. So we can even see the difference right now with our kindergarten class that has entered this year. And even though they have definitely been impacted, because pre-K was impacted in early childhood, but still in comparison, our results are so much more higher than for kiddos who left school as 3rd graders and now are coming back as 5th graders, and kind of the learning loss that has happened. And there's a very specific plan that the state has released to kind of help support, but it is a multi-year plan. They're saying to kind of catch these kids up, you know what I mean? We have to be very strategic in what we're doing. And like I said, the one of the things that is repeatedly mentioned is just to really meet the kids where they are now, you know what I mean? So if a student needs that extra support, we can definitely kind of swoop in and kind of offer it if they need it, so just wanted to add that.
Happy to address any of the questions you might
Yeah.
have.
Does anyone else have a question? Or comment? I have one for Blythe and Dr. Alardi, I guess. Taking into consideration, and I'm not saying that the advisory board or myself would even approve this, nor would the town. This is more of just an information type question. If every year we are still seeing our normal increases plus some trying to get us back on track, at what point would it be more beneficial to I want to try to word this correctly, I apologize, to restore everything that we need so that we are not constantly operating at an underfunded level? Does that make sense? Do I need to word that in a different way? I guess what I'm trying to say is every year we're somewhere between 3 and 5%, yet every year we're also still underfunded as a school system and partially as a town. What number or what percentage would we need to see one year to get us back to the level that we're not underfunded and then operate at a strictly COLA increase from then on, you know, except for obviously increasing class sizes?
That's a hard question, Susan, to answer, because if we were to make that adjustment, that doesn't just affect the 1 year budget, because you'd have to carry that higher number forward, right? So we've worked very closely with the town. I think we've been good partners throughout, and we've tried to bring forward what we think is most critical in order to work to rebuild. And I think I can't speak to the needs of other departments, but we've tried to acknowledge that, you know, all of the departments have some critical needs. And that's why you see on our list, there are some things we are not looking forward at this time. But I do think that, you know, if the town is committed to trying to close that funding gap, then as I think somebody brought it up, Brian might have brought it up earlier, we may have to adjust what the expectations are for the annual budget increase. And 3% is not, 3% is maintaining level services. It's not rebuilding. So, you know, it might be recalibrating expectations for what the budget asks will be going forward. If the commitment is to continue to grow and build and expand programs. Our budget request for this year, we're not building new programs. We're meeting required special educational needs and mandated services through our English language learning instruction, but we are not expanding and offering new programs at this point. So I do think that while I don't think the town could fund the full ask right now with the other demands that you have, we're putting forward what we think is critically needed. And I think going forward, it's probably unrealistic to expect that 3% will carry us forward with anything more than level services. And I don't think if you're looking at a 3% increase annually, that you are going to see that funding gap between Norfolk and the state close very quickly.
So at what point, to reinterpret what Susan said, at what point are we talking about an operating override?
I think that's important that you bring it up, David, because I don't feel comfortable speaking on the school budget. I think what's been put forward, you know, is responsible and what's, you know, needed for kids. But very, very simply put, the revenue side of the equation can't keep up. I mean, Todd and I have added back in some revenues this year that, you know, we'd rather not do, but we understand the needs of schools, and we understand the, you know, the growing impact on the town side. And what gets lost in this a little bit is there's fixed costs that on the town side of the budget that, you know, we also can't ignore. You know, the pension system increase of 7.4%, the health insurance increase of 7.1 or 2%, and that doesn't even include health insurance for the 3 new positions that, you know, the school has in its budget that we're going to have to absorb in some way. And I'm not saying we understand it and that that's what needs to happen, but, you know, the town simply can't raise revenues that are going to be over 5%, you know, even with the new growth that we've been fortunate to have. So I think that question is coming at some point. Because the way we've raised the revenues this year, we will not be able to generate the kind of free cash that will give us the latitude that, you know, this year we have. And I would strongly suggest that if we can't close the gap with cuts on the town side, that we keep the ARPA funds for the truly things that are more non-reoccurring. And if we're going to have to close the gap with some dollars, it would be free cash, which, because we cut back in FY21, we have a little more latitude to deal with this year. We hope to get away from that you know, for how the town manages its finances, but maybe this year we can't. So.
And I think, you know, strategically long term, we have to do things in a way that's going to be sustainable. Because if we add things back that we have to cut, then there's additional costs to the town for employment insurance and other things. So I think we have to do it systematically. And as far as an operational or an override, that also has to be timed very carefully to get public support. So I think.
I agree. No, I agree. I'm putting it out there as
Yeah.
this is a revenue issue that we cannot overcome.
Yeah.
And the B1 zoning redo that we did a year ago is not going to have any impact in the short term, for instance, then it's got to be part of the discussion. So at some point.
Yeah, I
not
agree.
this year. I don't think it's this year.
Yeah.
I just think that
Think about, because the I'm sure you'll hear when you hear from KP, their per pupil expenditure is significantly lower than the state as well. So it's not just in Norfolk Public Schools, it's sort of a regional. And you're right, down the road, that we're going to need a different plan for that.
But then again, Paul and I rant and rave about how I don't want to listen to KP's troubles because they blame it on the other towns, and nothing personal, Paul. We'll talk about this next week.
No, I'm just saying that it's the educational funding long-term is
I understand. I'm making a joke. I'm trying to somewhat light about this.
I think what my own personal, again, not speaking for the whole advisory board, only speaking for Susan, is that it's hard to garner support when the conversation is, look how underfunded we are. Well, we're still spending a lot of money and yet we're consistently underfunded. I feel like at some point, again, I agree with David, it's not this year. It's probably not even next year, to be honest with you, because we're going to be asking next year for the school expansion. But at some point, we're going to need to have a discussion on how do we stop, if we're going to continue to spend and spending over and increasing every year, how do we get to, what do we need to spend in a single year or to increase our bottom line to get us to a point where we're not always operating at a deficit, are always operating at from an underfunded perspective. Again, not just more of a conversation, not actually asking you to give me an answer, because I know you can't. But, you know, the school, as everyone knows, the schools are the biggest portion of our town budget. And from what I understand, all of the funding for the schools doesn't even fall under the school budget. There are a lot of expenses that pertain to the schools that fall under the town side of the budget. So the school spend is actually even higher than what we see, and yet we're still underfunded. And this is not, please, Dr. Lottery and Medora, do not take this as a criticism. I'm not criticizing. I'm trying to get.
Oh, no. I do want to make sure you recall, though, that when we're talking about per pupil spending, it does include all sources of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're so that includes money spent by the town on school expenses.
Okay.
And it includes the money that we write grants for. So it includes the money that, you know, Vicki in all her free time goes out and hustles for various grant funded positions and things like that.
I just want to be sure that when I say these things, you don't that you guys don't interpret that as me not being in support, because as you know, I've made it very clear that schools and town services, police and fire, are my number one priority as far as being on the advisory board and where I stand. So I'm always in support and always want to make sure that we are spending in the most fiscally responsible way that also helps our students and helps our town maintain its stellar rating. Because I truly believe that affects everyone, even people who don't have children in our schools, because it affects their home values and everything else. So I'm 100% in support of you guys, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to see us get to a point where we can stop the perpetual underfunding. I'm not sure what the answer is. I would love for someone
I would love to get to that
tell
point.
me what the answer is. I certainly don't have that answer. But that's just something I wanted to bring up. So.
If I can make kind of a campaigny observation, I think part of your problem as, you know, a person who's cranky about budgets is your scores are actually pretty darn good, right? Like this year, even though you went down, everyone went down, and you're a point better than the rest of the state than you were the year before. when you do the MCAS comparison, but you do it Norfolk versus state, I think you might find a different set of numbers that look a little more, dire or realistic if you compared your cohort that you're comparing on the finance side, also on the achievement side. I know it's it's not.
Oh, when I made my point earlier about the deficiencies in the MCAS, I'm only looking at the performance of Norfolk. We consistently blow the state out of the water. I'm well aware that we are a well-educated,
which is your problem.
Yeah, no, I know, but when does that become an okay thing to say? Okay, well, we dropped 15 percentage points in performance in one round of taking the MCAS math test. So is that okay?
Well, if I don't want to spend any money on you, I'm going to say, yeah, you dropped, but everybody did, so we'll make it up later. I think we're going to make it up in the next couple of years by having a math specialist is my response to that. I mean, that's really, we will make it up. It will not happen in a vacuum, and it won't happen. It will, the catch up, and I'm not, I don't mean to be blasé about it, but I'm very serious on this point. That catch up that needs to happen for the children, so we had last year's MCAS takers, we had a gap in MCAS. So there was a whole round of children who've only taken it once and missed a year. The rising third graders have never taken a standardized test before. They're about to sit for it in a couple of weeks. Those children will need corrective action as learners who are suffering from a math deficiency to regain, and that action will not happen given the enrollment situation that we're facing as well. And that's the part that is an issue. Yeah, so it's there has to be some level of support. But what I'm saying to you is, if you took the MCAS scores of the cohorts you use on per pupil expenditure, those towns are going to have much better MCAS scores than the state will. So it will not look like you are so much better than everybody else. And it will make the point that, hey, we need more money to be better.
Well, I would be thrilled to present it that way. My hope would be that, I mean, looking at how our group of students has performed, in my mind, should be sufficient. I'm happy to display any data, and I'm sure Ingrid and Vicky would be happy to collect and display any data in that respect as well. But, we have a group of students who are showing a learning loss, regardless of how you want to compare it externally.
I think what Rob is saying is exactly what you're saying. I think what you're saying is that we get presented with comparisons to like towns, except when it comes to the MCAS scores, and then we get compared to the state. And like Rob said, you're performing above the state average, but we're performing below, which means we're a great school district because we do much. I worked for a town where they kept telling me that we were the most efficient town in the most efficient city in the Commonwealth. And I hated it because all it meant was that we were working harder than everyone else for the same amount of money. And what Rob's point is that if we are scoring above the state average with the below the comparison town spending, then that's not a fair comparison. We should be comparing ourselves on the MCAS scores as the same way we're comparing ourselves on the budget scores. And that, I don't think either one of us are saying,
no, I think we're all
not doing great. But I don't think, I honestly think what Rob's point is that we have an apples comparison on the budget and an orange comparisons on the scores. And we have to merge those.
I completely understand what you're asking for. I live and breathe Norfolk data. We built an entire platform this year to analyze data every way you can possibly think of. So I understand what you're asking, and it does.
I don't know if it's doable, but
well, David, I just want to jump in and say we do provide that data. Every year I provide a report to the school committee of benchmark and baseline data, and we compare our MCAS scores, our attendance rate, our bullying incidents, all of that to those same 12 communities. Okay. So we do a more comprehensive academic report and school comparison as part of to provide the committee with information for oversight. We don't include it all in the budget presentation because we're always told by the town we get 10 slides and we have to start taking things out. So we do the state data there, but we certainly have that data. It's actually posted on our website. So if you're interested, When we compare to those other 12 districts as far as MCAS, we still outperform many of the districts. We are below, I'll tell you, we're below Lincoln, we're below
You're
Sudbury.
not supposed to say that. That wasn't the right answer.
We outperform many, but we are below. You're right. The Concords, the Lincolns, the higher spending districts do outperform Norfolk. But we are not at the bottom. We're around the 70th percentile of those groups when you compare academics with the same region.
It just means you're working harder
That's exactly right.
You're working harder for less money.
That's
I mean,
exactly
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I don't think that's what
it becomes a bad thing in the long term for the people who are doing the harder work. And then you get less qualified, less,
I think
less
that's exactly
tenure,
what
less
David is trying
everything.
to say. It's great that you guys are such hard workers. It's amazing that you bring us in as close to budget and or level service as you can every year, but we're also operating at a deficit every year. So he's saying at some point we've got to have that discussion, and we have to work smarter and not necessarily harder, I think.
That's a good way of putting it.
And I do think too, when you're looking at MCAS is only one measure of educational quality. There's a lot of other things that aren't reflected in that. Your elective courses, your gifted and talented programming, your world language, electric engineering design kinds of things, supplemental things that many districts can bring in that we have not been able to address. So it's just one, the MCAS is one metric. There's many others. And again, I would suggest people take a look at the baseline and benchmark report if you want more comparison data to those like communities. It may be helpful.
If I can address the override question that people were discussing. So the state put into place, we can only garner 2.5% per year, thanks to Prop 2.5 plus new growth. That's it. So whatever we put in for new growth, that's really all we can put in for the budget. So year over year for the past 20 years, our average budget increase is 4.28. This year we're above the 4.28, and we're trying to bridge that gap, which we will bridge that gap, but we're above what our average is over 20 years. So we are funding more this year than we have in past years. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're making it up. In order to get ahead, you have to identify all the requirements in order to put you back in where you really need to be for your full service, both town side, school side, whether it's a fire department, police department, DPW, whatever, recreation department. You have to, identify those areas that you have weaknesses, fill the gaps, come up with a magic number, and then ask for it as a override.
Right.
But I'll tell you, 2011 proposition override failed. 2009 proposition override failed. 2006 they passed the override, and before that, 2001 they passed that one. In 2000 there's another proposition override, that one failed. So it's not necessarily guaranteed that you're going to even get an override, but that's what those are the numbers.
I don't think anyone was counting on the guaranteed override. I'm just saying that at some point that number needs to be placed in front of the populace. So
correct. And I agree with you, Dave. What I'm saying is you still had a 50-50 shot of even moving that needle forward.
no, I agree. I'm just saying that at some point people need to make a choice. So
Well, especially since we've got two very important capital projects
exactly.
on the near horizon. When you add that to it without debt coming off right away, it's just a lot to ask taxpayers, and with no judgment, I'm please understand, no judgment about which services are most important. It's just an overall concern.
Right, exactly.
Ingrid, one last question for me. I know we aren't there yet, but when you get to the point that you will be asking for the expansion, does that include a full-time person to oversee the entire project? I do not mean a GC. That's not what I mean. I do not mean a contractor or a builder. I mean a full-time person to oversee everything to ensure that we stay on budget, on time, not
So
related to the build, necessarily related to the entire project.
So all we're asking for at this point is funding for a feasibility study. Once that feasibility study is done, we will be reapplying to MSBA. If we work through MSBA, then we have to go with one of their project managers. They assign an OPM to oversee the whole project in the process. If not, then the town would have to include that funding in their in the request for the building, and that will, the cost of that will all be in the feasibility study estimates.
Okay, if you get the MSBA funding, what percentage of the construction, what percentage of the cost of the project will it cover?
So
what would the number be roughly?
It's not a set number. It varies project to project, and it's based on a number of different considerations. But the past two projects that they funded, which were the H. Olive Day roof and the Freeman Kennedy original build, were at close to 50% reimbursement.
Okay. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions related to the school budget or for Blythe on any of the other topics that we've discussed this evening? Nope. Okay. David, are we prepared to approve minutes even though Mike is not here?
No, I haven't, Erica, I'm sorry. I didn't see any minutes from last week's meeting. Did you prepare them, or?
I owe you minutes from last week. I did send Mike the minutes from the prior week, but where he's not here, I don't. Yeah.
In other words, the answer is no, because I haven't seen the minutes, and I don't, Mike, I didn't think Mike was going to miss this meeting too, so.
Yeah, so David, do you mind doing this week and last week's?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I will. Please send them to me,
Yeah,
Erica.
I will send them to you.
Okay.
But we need to get Mike's minutes done from 2 meetings ago. And if he's not going to be here next week, I don't know what's going on, but if he's not here next week, I'll do those too.
I believe that last week he had a work thing he was out of town for, and this week was a family obligation. I may have those reversed, but
Okay.
if I
Either
remember
way,
right,
if
one
he's
was-
not going to be here next week, Erica, send me the meeting from 2 weeks ago too.
Will
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, we don't want to
By the
go.
way, I do
more
not
than-
want to be the clerk again, Susan, and I'm making that statement publicly.
Understand, no one's going to tap you because you already did it. Other people are going to have to step up in the fall to take over.
No, I mean 2 weeks from now. If he's not here, I'm not doing it anymore.
Oh, okay. I got what you mean. He should be. He has not told me that he's not. But yes, we don't want to go any further than what we've already gone for the last meeting. So Erica, if you could reach out to Mike and just make sure that he is coming to next week's meeting, and we'll be prepared to, has reviewed the minutes and we'll be prepared. And then David, you can do the this week and last week, and we will be caught up after next week. And I think that's it.
Just one thing.
Yes.
Next week is the KP School is going to go first on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a question because I've got a fire station meeting at 6.
Yes.
So I'll join you as soon as I can afterwards. I assume you're going to want to jump back into the warrant a bit and talk about some of the.
Erica, can you just remind me, I don't have it in front of me, what is on the agenda for next week besides KP?
Yeah, let me pull it up. I think that might have been it.
Okay.
I was just wondering when we want to go through the rest of these articles with any questions.
Yep.
1 second. Yeah, so King Philip budget was the only specific thing on next week's agenda. And I know Paul already mentioned he's coming from another commitment, so he may need to start a few minutes late for that too. So
why don't we change?
We can do the minutes first.
We can do that. Why don't we do this? Why don't we change the meeting time? You just have to do it by Monday. Change the meeting time to start at 7:15. And that'll give us about 15 minutes to do all of the minutes that we have to do and any, normal advisory business schedule, agenda, anything like that. And then he should be here by 7:30 to get started.
Perfect.
So next week, everybody who's still on the call, we can start at 7:15 next week. And we'll do advisory business first. And then after that, I believe, Blythe, we have Rich coming back on the 6th, and then we'll be ready to vote both on the 6th and the 13th. So yeah, let's go over next week. Let's do KP and any additional warrant questions that we have. And hopefully by then you'll also have an answer on the budget.
Yes, well, select board meets, on the 29th, and I'm hopeful that we can have them vote on April 5th. And then I appreciate spending time on the warrant next week, because we did add 5 articles to the warrant from the last version. So there's a bit more to chat about.
Okay. All right, great. I'll take a motion to adjourn, and I will see you all next week.
Can I ask a question?
Oh,
May I
yes.
ask
Sorry, go
a
ahead.
general question at some point? Susan, at some point, are we, and it's a question actually mostly as much for Blythe, are we considering going back to in-person meetings anytime soon?
I was planning to, we can do them now. If anyone is interested, they do have a room for us at Town Hall where anyone who wants to can be in person, and anyone else could be called in via Zoom. It basically what it is there's a 1 camera on the room, and all of those people are Zoom, and then anyone else who calls in would be via Zoom. We can do that now. I opted not to do that for this spring because when I had to set the calendar, we were still sort of in this height of COVIDness, and I didn't want us to all have to worry about masks and sitting in the same room. But I am under the assumption that we should be good by next fall, and we will be going back to in-person meetings with the ability for the next, at least for the next year, because it's through 2023, for anyone who could not make it in person. I would encourage in person, but anyone who could not make it in person due to childcare, work, travel, would be able to call in via Zoom. And then participants could also be involved via Zoom. But I do agree we need to go back to in person. I just didn't set the agenda that way for the spring because I wasn't sure in February where we were going to be with.
No, I understand. I fully
craziness.
understand that part. I just think some of the other boards are meeting in person full-time or whatever. In that
Remote meetings have only been extended till mid-July at this point. So
oh, okay. I thought it was 2023. Okay.
Yeah, no, they've been doing it on a kind of few months by few months basis.
But if anyone would prefer to not be at home, and we are welcome to use the room. So just let me know and I'll make sure to reserve it and get the Zoom and recordings and everything set up for anyone who wants to go in and meet in person in that room, if that makes it easier for anyone. Even for, I mean, even for the rest of this spring.
Let me figure that out. I think at some point we have to have a live presence, but
oh yes, for sure. I know we only have 3 more meetings for this spring, but if anyone wants to use that room, we can certainly, I'm happy to, because as you guys know, I'm sitting in my car, so I'm happy to go back to being in person.
That might have been one of the reasons I was prompted to ask the question.
Yes, of course. But definitely, unless something drastic changes with COVID, we will be going back to in-person next fall, and everyone will be expected to attend in-person meetings like we used to. So,
Susan, so for the fall, when we go back to those in-person meetings, will those still have the capability for people to call in via Zoom asking?
I'm not sure. Blythe, will they be able to be participants, be able to be involved via Zoom, or no?
That's got to be worked out. I mean, back before COVID, the rule was the select board had to decide whether they want to allow remote participation of people who were on the committee, and they chose not to. Now that everyone's learned a whole new dynamic, I think the state's got to figure out what remote meetings mean and for whom, and set some new rules that everyone can decide they're going to adopt or not.
I like the idea of requiring the board to be in person unless you have, say, written authorization to Zoom in prior. But I like the idea of participants being able to Zoom in, because I think that for, at least for the advisory board, we have had much better participation from the community over the last 2 years because they can come in via Zoom. That's just my opinion. So I would opt to say that the meetings are in person for the board members, but participants can still dial in via Zoom. Since we have that capability now, we could just extend it as long as that's what the select board agrees to. But that would be my vote.
That makes sense. I'm asking because I'm planning on moving out of town. Starting probably next week is when I'm shipping out. So at least for like the next 6 months or so, I won't be like in a position where I can come to town hall and meet in person. So Susan, I'm happy to talk offline about ways that we can deal with this, but just wanted to flag it for you.
David might be able to answer this better or Rob, because they've both served on boards a lot longer than I have, but you may need to speak to Jay Tallerman about that, because I'm not sure if you are not a resident of Norfolk that you can remain on a board.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. So, I mean, I would assume if it's a temporary location change, but your residency stays in Norfolk, it wouldn't be an issue. But if your residency is changing, I would think that you may want to speak to either someone on the select board or Jay Tallerman about that, just to be on the safe side. I don't want to be in violation of anything. So let's double check with Jay and on that.
Sounds great.
You can speak to the town clerk.
Okay, Carol Green then could obviously answer that question for you. I'm actually not sure of the answer to that. I mean, logic would tell me to serve on a Norfolk board, you have to be a Norfolk resident, but I don't actually know the answer to that. So, but anyway, either way, we have the Zoom ability through July. Whether we go back to in person or not, we have that ability at least through July. We'll cross that bridge when we get to the fall, but my assumption is unless something changes, we're going back to in-person meetings in the fall. So
thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I will
motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Somebody second.
Second.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, see you guys next week, 7:15.
Great, thank you.